There we go. All right, now it seems like we're up and running. Terrific. So we will run with however many people we've got going right here. And without further ado, let's get started. Okay. Now, wait, let me activate the chat box. There we go. Okay. So, lecture 9. What we're going to be doing here is talking more about UV mapping, and we're going to be talking more about how to improve our UV layout. We've kind of got the basics going in terms of how do we UV map something, applying a checkerboard to test and see how well our layout is currently coming along. And so now today, what we're going to do is delve into more concepts of working with seams. And we're also going to delve into some of the ideas of improvement of our layout after we've created the shell, because it is possible to make it even better, believe it or not. So we're going to talk about those ideas. So first things first, something I want to talk to you about is the idea that when we create our UV shells, oftentimes we generate what we call texture seams. And if you look really closely at this marker here, you can see, if you look at the different checker patterns here, the squares here are much larger than the squares here, and they don't attach to each other. And the squares here do not line up with the squares here. So just looking at this object, I can tell right away that this is a UV shell, this is a UV shell, and this is a UV shell. And I know they're each separate shells because the texture is not continuous over all of them, and the squares are not the same size or shape, which is again an indication that there's an issue with the proportion of these shells relative to the real object. So I got all kinds of issues here, and I need to fix them or resolve them. So in terms of UV shells, what we can do is we can literally sew them together. And it's basically, it's funny because when we talk about UV mapping, I will use, and there are many tools that use terms that sound like something a tailor would use, you know, cutting and sewing and, you know, the stitching and all this kind of stuff. And that's because literally when we create a UV shell, we are kind of like a tailor. Because if you think about it, you know, when we make clothing for a person, clothing or cloth is a 2D idea. And when we make it fit very well onto a person, people are a 3D idea. So when we are cutting forms and patterns of cloth to make it fit on a person, it's very much like UV mapping, because the UV shell is a 2D idea that represents something that will fit very tightly over a 3D idea. So they kind of use some tailoring terms to draw a parallel there, or a correlation between those two things. So what we're going to work on is, how do we fix these seams? How do we sew these things together and make them look better and improve the overall quality of the layout of our UV shells? And to do that, we're going to be utilizing two tools, the Cut UVs tool and the Move and Sew tool. And these are going to allow us to, again, improve the quality of our layout. So we're going to work with this tool and just kind of see how they work. And again, the objective here is to improve our UV layout by sewing seams together when and where we can. So we got an activity going, so we're going to set our copy of Maya. Hi, Maya. We're going to set it to the activity file folder and open that bad boy up. And we're going to go to File, Open Scene, and we want our Advanced UV Tools activity. This is the one we want. Okay, so no need to save that. Okay, so here we are with our marker that we saw in that previous slide. And as you can see, just by looking at it, obviously these squares are bigger than these squares. So this is a shell. And if I look over here, I can see these squares don't really match up like these do, right? So there must be a seam there as well. And I don't even have to see the UV layout to determine that. But again, if I go to UV editor and I open up my editor, which is huge right now, let me try to make that a little bit smaller so it doesn't dominate the landscape. But once I select my UV shell or select my object, I can see, oh yeah, look at that. Okay, there's the different shells. And, you know, interestingly enough, I can select the faces here and see, oh yeah, that's this shell right here. And if I select these faces here, oh, that's that shell up there. And again, if I select these faces here, this shell here. So I can see, yeah, these are definitely separate shells. The fact that these things are cut right here and separated from each other, that's why I don't have continuous flow of texture. So what I'm going to try to do is eliminate the seams. And what I want to impress upon you before we even get into that is the fact that we eliminate seams wherever we can to improve the quality of the UV layout. The objective is to have a great UV layout. I want to have the nicest UV layout I can that does everything I need it to do so that my textures will look beautiful on my models. The goal is not attach everything to each other. We never attach everything to each other as a sacrifice to quality. So just bear that in mind. The objective is beautiful layout, but we do try to eliminate seams whenever and wherever we can, because that is part of that process. But we do not allow bad UV layout just so that we can sew things together. That's not the goal. So let's take a look at an obvious transition, again, from here to here. Obviously, these are two different shells. And if I grab the shells, I can see, oh no, this is the one I want right here. This guy right here represents that part of the object, and this one here represents that part. So I know that these two attach to each other by looking at them. However, something that you can do is you can literally, actually, let me grab these guys and just move them away from everybody else, because sometimes it's distracting. So I'm gonna just move this over here. I'm going to grab this guy and move it over there, and grab this guy and move it over here. Okay. Now, interesting thing about UV shells is if you go to edge mode in your UV editor and you select an edge, the edge on one object will actually light up where it connects. So you can see these two edges are brother and sister edges. And if you actually go to the object, where are you, you little nut? If you go right here on our object, this edge is represented by both of these edges because they are in fact the same edge. It's true they're represented by two different shells, but they are the same edge of the object. So that edge there, these two guys go together. So I can kind of determine, okay, this is going to attach to that. So that being said, I could take this shell and move it a little closer to where it's going to go. All right. Now, if these two shells attach to each other, as my object would seem to indicate, if I select an edge, right, there's an edge. If I know that this attaches to that and they're supposed to be the same edge, do they look the same size right now? What do you guys think? That's supposed to be the same edge. No, absolutely, they're not. This is definitely longer than that. And what that's telling me is that this piece right here is too big, or this piece is too small, because these edges are supposed to connect to each other. Therefore, they should be the same size. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So on the one hand, I can see this is much shorter than that. So it's obvious that one of these needs to change size. But Maya is telling me the exact same thing when I look at these squares, because these squares are much bigger than these squares. So I know the proportion of this shell relative to this shell is off. They're not the same size. They're not the same proportion. They don't fit together properly as these pieces do. So honestly, I have two choices. I can either make this shell bigger or this shell smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger. And I'm just going to use my scale tool to do that. I'm going to make it bigger. And, oh, wrong one. My bad. Grab this guy right here. And I'm going to scoot it over. And I'm looking at this edge here attaches to that edge there. And again, you can see not even close. If this is the same edge, you know, this is huge. That's like 3 times the size of that one. So clearly something has to be done. So I'm just going to grab this shell and I'm going to make it bigger. And you'll notice that as I make this thing bigger, what's happening to my squares? They're getting smaller, absolutely. So as I make this thing bigger, they're getting smaller. And then I can move this piece right to where it's going to attach. And watch what happens when my edges are getting closer to the same size. How are my squares looking? Are these getting closer to the same size? Yes, exactly. So I am now much closer to the correct proportion of this shell relative to that one. So again, I can go to edge mode and select the edges, and I can see, oh, this edge attaches to that one. So I'm just going to grab this whole shell. And I'm going to just scoot it over a tiny bit so that the edges line up. And again, it needs to be a little bit bigger. And I can literally select the edges and you can see, oh yeah, these guys are going to attach to each other. And then look, these shells are almost the same size. And again, look over here. Oh, look, and these squares are almost the same size. So these are the correlations we're making. All of these ideas come together when we're doing it right. Now, it's true, these squares are more rectangular in shape, and these are kind of rectangular in shape as well. So we can address that also. And as you remember from our example yesterday or 2 days ago, the idea is if I'm trying to get a square of information into a rectangle, I have to stretch it. So I know that there's some distortion going on here. It's not completely the right size and shape. So again, grabbing this shell and I go to my scale tool, if I squash it, there we go, that's looking more like squares. But I could have, gone the other way with it and then realized, okay, that's pretty good. That's not bad. But if these need to be the same size because they're going to connect to each other, because they do, then probably squeezing on this axis is the better way to go. Because I am resulting in squares and it's still lining up like it could attach to each other. Does that make sense? Okay, terrific. Because you have to manipulate the shells. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to edge mode and I select one edge, right? And then the brother and sister edges light up. And I'm going to hold shift and just go to the other end and double click. And what that does, most of the time, and what that does is it connects all the edges on that top between those 2 points. Click this one, hold shift, double click that one. And that grabs all the edges, brother and sister, for both of these shells. So now that I've got them both selected, I'm going to go to, in the UV editor, cut and sew, and choose move and sew. And it will literally sew the 2 together. Now, there's actually 2 versions of the UV editor within the same copy of Maya, which absolutely drives me batty. But if you have the other version of the UV editor, what you're looking for is going to be way over here on the left under the category polygons. So you'll click on polygons and you'll go way down and you'll see move and sew. It is in there, but it's going to be under polygons. But for those of us who have the newer version of the UV editor in 2017 and 2018, we go to move and sew here. And then literally what it will do is sew those seams together. Boop. like magic. And again, feel free to make a noise because Maya does not. And you can see how, wow, the squares are flowing from one side to the other. And I will show you that as I move and sew them again. So it's one continuous smooth transition from this shell to this shell. They look like they're connected now. Does that make sense? Okay, terrific. Now again, these are looking a little stretched. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this top row of UVs, and using my move tool, I'm just going to play with it a little bit and see if I can improve the layout. You know, this is obviously too much, it's squashing. This is too much, it's stretching. So I can just kind of play a little bit and try to get a little bit more square-like in appearance in terms of the shape there. All right, so that's looking pretty good. All right, so again, nice smooth transition from shell to shell. All right, so now my last one, I can see, okay, if you look really closely, these are not attaching to each other, so obviously they're not sewing together nicely. So what I'm going to do is, you know, figure out where that is. I can select the edge here. Oh, yeah, this edge here connects to that edge there. So again, the same issue is looking at this, you know, that looks much smaller than that. And so what I'm going to do is move this shell nearer to where it's going to go. And just like before, make an adjustment with the scale and try to line these things up because they're going to line up. And when the edges are the same size, I know I'm getting close. Now, you might be wondering, well, do I have to move things? Do I have to size them? And the answer to that is no, you don't. Because if you grab an edge and then grab the other edge and then just go to move and sew, Maya will sew them together wherever they are. I mean, they could be on opposite ends of the UV editor, and Maya will sew one object to the other. But what you'll notice is it did sew them together, and we do have a fluid transition, but I see like there's some distortion going on there. And what I want to see is if I'm more careful with how I line this stuff up, do I get a better connection? And the reason I recommend that is because, you know, again, for beginners, you guys don't know as many of the cute little tricks and things that you can do to make this stuff look better. And so that's why I kind of, on a very simplistic level, very basic level, I show you guys how you can attach these things together more easily and just see what's happening. Because you might attach two shells to each other and the end result is terrible, and you would think, oh no, I shouldn't attach them because it looks terrible. But it's just a function of how you did it. So I'm going to size it here, and actually, let me do the move and sew, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Boop. So now they're attached to each other, looking pretty good. I'm going to grab this row because again, I'm seeing a little bit of stretching in there, so I'm just going to see if I can minimize that just by moving that a little bit. Now that's looking pretty good how those are connecting to each other. I'm seeing some distortion up here because I'm looking at rectangles, and I know it's the right width because they're attached to each other, so it must be a height thing. So if I kind of just, there we go, that looks better. Now again, in terms of attaching these things to each other smoothly so that we get a nice transition from shell to shell, that's looking better. Now let's take the instance where we did just move and sew from wherever. So I'm going to detach these shells again. And let's say this was way the wrong size and I wanted to attach them. I could still do it. Just grab this one, double click that one. It's going to pick the edges on both objects, move and sew, and you would look at that and go, oh wow, that's a terrible connection. That looks awful. Look what I did to my UV layout. Oh, those shells can't be attached to each other, so I'm not going to. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So again, if you don't know any better, you would think that was a bad connection, but it wasn't a bad connection. It was just that the pieces weren't sized well enough for each other yet to make a good connection. And that's why I have you guys just make those shells look like they're going to go together. You know, set them up like you're going to cut them out and sew them together, just like they were a suit you were making. And that's going to ensure a better connection. And then when you do connect them, move in sew. Now we're getting a little bit better connection, looks smoother, and it's not a problem. So I can make sure that I'm getting a good connection between the shells. And in terms of trying to change the size of the shells, you really need to use your scale tool. It's just a better way to make adjustments to it, because you can literally scale it bigger or smaller, and you can look at what the checker pattern is telling you. Use that information to make a smart decision about what to do. Does that make sense? Bigger, smaller, sew it together, stretch it out. I mean, we're kind of rolling our sleeves in there, and just like you know, if we were making a cardboard or a construction paper card for somebody, or if we were, you know, making clothing for someone, or, you know, cutting out fabric or material, this is just like that. We're just doing it on a computer, and we have the benefit of being able to make things bigger or smaller, whereas in the real world, as far as I know, we can't do that. So you really just got to get in there and work the shell and get it to attach to each other. All right, so now this is looking better. All right, I like where it's going. It's pretty smooth, nice transition. Squares are relatively similar. These are a little bit smaller than these. There's a tiny bit of stretching here, but it's doing pretty well. All right, so here's where we have to talk about, what do I need this thing to do? And if I've said this once, I've said it a billion times. The most important thing you ask yourself before any project that you take on, what you have to ask yourself is, what do I need this thing to do? What's its job? Now, if we are making a commercial for this marker, right? We're doing a commercial for Markero, the greatest marker ever. And it's a still shot, right? I'm just going to take a picture. I'm going to render an image of this, right? With a texture on there, not the checker pattern. That's not very cool. So I've got a really cool texture on there. It's got a picture of, you know, a duck or something, whatever their logo is, and Markero, the greatest marker ever, blah, blah, blah. If this is going to be a still image, great, we're done. We've got our UVs looking good. Ultimately, when we're all done, we're going to take these UV shells, and we're going to get them back into the 0 to 1 space. So everything will end up down in here. All right, everything will be squeezed down so that it will fit into the 0 to 1 space. And we're going to talk more about that shortly. But that's going to be fine. You know, make sure all my shells are inside, nothing outside. Okay, that would be fine. But what I want to talk about is, well, what happens if it's not a still shot? What happens if, yeah, that looks great, but what if we're talking about a camera is going to come in, right? Let's pretend that my moving camera is the camera. We're not doing a still shot anymore, but we're doing a commercial. So the camera moves around, and the camera comes in, Markero, the greatest marker ever. That was a little Batman-esque there. Markero, the greatest marker ever. So we zoom in, and then we pan around here, right? And we go, oh, whoops. What's this right here? And if you take a look, I'll show you. What we're looking at is the texture seam. That's right, Brian. Good job. You get a cookie. So here's my texture seam, and I just moved it to make it easier to see. But what we're talking about is, this is where the texture ends. And anytime we take something 3D and lay it out flat, there's going to be an edge, right? And so this edge here and this edge here come together to form this texture seam. So here's where we get into a little bit of trouble, because as long as I'm on this side of the marker, it doesn't really make a difference if there's a seam on the other side, because it's a still shot. It doesn't matter. But if I've got a camera moving in and showing my awesome marker and swinging around to this side, when I get to this side, I'm going to see that seam, because if there's like a picture here or text or, you know, whatever we've got on this marker, that's going to be pretty obvious that that's where the texture seam is. So what I really need to do is put that texture seam, yes, no bueno, es correcto. So now what I have to do is fix that. I have to put that seam where it's not going to cause a problem, right? So where do you guys think I should put the seam? Yep, it's going to go into the 0 to 1 space, but I want to move this seam from right here. Oh, yes. I want to put it on an edge. I want to line up the squares. And where it can't be seen too well. Excellent, David. I want to hide that seam. Just like if you look at the clothing you're wearing right now, if you've got a shirt on, hopefully you've got a shirt on, or some pants on, we tend to hide seams of clothing. We don't like to have seams obvious. If you're wearing a t-shirt, you'll notice that the seam is across the top of your shoulder, right? So that's where we put the seam, because we don't really see the top of the shoulder much. That's a good place to hide it. If you're wearing a Hawaiian style shirt like Dennis and myself, then you know, the seams are under the arm. You know, we sort of hide that seam. The seam for your pants go down the sides, because you're more likely to look straight at someone than from the side. So we try to minimize seams with our clothing because they're unattractive, and with UV maps, the same thing. So I don't want a seam right here. That's a bad place for it. Where I'd really like to put that seam is down here. I can put it on the bottom of my marker, because if my camera comes in like this, Markero, the greatest marker ever, and then it zooms around to this side, whoa, I can't wait to draw. Okay, I'm going to see that side clearly, therefore that's a bad place for a seam to be. So what I can do is I can literally move it to where I want it, on the bottom where I will never see it, hide it, like I would do with my shirt. So what I'll do is I'll use my other tool, my Cut UVs tool. So what I'm going to do is double click on this bottom edge, because that's where I would like my seam to be, down here. Not over here where I'm seeing it right now, down here where it's more hidden. And that correlates to this edge right here. So what I'm going to do is go to my Cut and Sew and choose Cut. And again, if you have the older version of the UV editor, what you're looking for is going to be under polygons, way over here on the left. So if you go down, 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 you'll see Cut UV edges, and that will allow you to do the same thing. So again, the newer UV editor, it's Cut and Sew, and the older one, it'll be under polygons, go all the way down to cut UV edges. So what we're going to do now is go to Cut, and you'll see what that does is it makes a new seam here, and I can see it here. But now the issue is I have two seams, one here and one there. All right. So in terms of that seam, what do you think I should do to fix this one? Sew it, exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this shell here, right? And all I'm going to do is move it to the other side of this other shell and attach it. And the reason I did that is because if I grab this edge right here, I can see, oh yeah, this edge attaches to that edge on the other side. So what I'm going to do is grab my shell, and then I'm just going to move it to the other side over here, and then line it up as well as I'm able. Grab the edges, and again, move and sew, just like I did before. And then what that does is now this is beautiful over here. Nice, happy, fluid squares, no distortion, no seam. And I've moved the seam down here where no one will see it. It's on the bottom. So it's much more obscure, harder to see, and won't interfere with my beautiful sweeping camera shot. Does that make sense? Fabulous. Good, good, good. Okay, so again, it's all about hiding the seam wherever and whenever you can. So again, making sure, what do I need this thing to do, is your guiding force, because that helps. And yes, you can make even more fancy textures. All right, so we've got move and sew, and we've got moving that seam around. So that now it's in a much better location. It's down here on the bottom where, you know, you can't really see it. It's hidden. That's going to work great. Now, don't do anything to this file. We're gonna keep playing with this, but for right now, we're gonna go back to some slides. Any questions about the idea of moving and sewing? Are we all pretty good with that? Good, good, good. Terrific. Good. All right. As long as Jessica's got it, I'm good. I was very worried about you because you were so quiet. You can't be quiet in here. You got to talk. All right. Yeah, good. Yes, I know. That's all right. All righty, cool. So let's get into some more work here. And again, improving the quality of our UV layout. Now, as you can see, our UVs are not perfect, right? They're getting better. We've got decent layout. That looks pretty good. There's some distortion going on here. Not too bad. Again, these squares are a little bit different size than that one. You know, pretty good, you know, but can I make them better? Maybe, because there's some other tools I can use to further improve the quality of my UV layout. So what I'm going to do is propose that we iron our UVs. Now, if you guys have ever ironed anything in your life, and my sympathies if you have, because ironing is the worst. Well, it's not the worst. Moving is the worst. Painting is number 2. Ironing is number 3. But ironing is no fun at all, which is why I try to avoid it. And if I buy clothing that does not look decent after just throwing it in the dryer, I don't wear it. That's kind of my my MO. But what we can do with our UV shells is they have to look as good as we can get them to look. So we can actually improve the layout of our UV shells with a process that's very similar to ironing. Excuse me. A little bit of a bullfrog. Oh my, there we go. That's better. All right, so again, the issue here is we're going to do a little bit of ironing. And we're going to do that ironing utilizing a tool called the Smooth UVs tool and the Unfold tool, both of which basically take your UVs and iron them out so that you get a little bit better quality. Much like an iron takes the wrinkles out of clothing, the Smooth UVs tool kind of does the same thing. It kind of gets the wrinkles out and gives you a much better looking layout. And oftentimes it will improve it dramatically. So we're going to play using the Unfold and the Smooth UVs tool and try to see if we can get our layout to look a little bit better. So again, it's looking pretty good at this point. It's not bad, but we might be able to make it look better. So that's what our goal is. Now, in terms of our the tools we're going to be using, all right, we're going to be going to modify, and you will see, oh no, I'm sorry, it's under tools, I believe. Yep, they moved it over here. It's under tools. It's called Smooth. And if you are in the old UV editor, it's under the old one, I believe it's under polygons again. and you're looking for the smooth UVs tool. But let's take a look at how these guys work. Now, in terms of your tools, you always want to check your options of what it's set for. Luckily, it's fairly straightforward in terms of what's in there. There's not a whole lot for you to play with, but what you want to make sure is that you are at your defaults, because that's what I'm operating from. So if you happen to be in your tool, it's not looking like, it's not doing the things that my tool does for me, just be sure to hit that reset and bring it back to its defaults. Now, in terms of the Smooth UVs tool, what I'm going to do is literally just grab all the UVs in my shell, and you go to Tools and then choose the Smooth UVs tool, and you'll see this little sort of controller that pops up, and it says Unfold and Relax. And basically, these are the two things that this tool sort of functions with. You are either unfolding your UV shells or you are relaxing your UV shells. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of the relax capacity. I don't find that it works as well for me, but feel free to explore that tool and decide if you like it. But I much prefer the unfold capacity of the tool. And basically what you will do is you put your cursor over the word unfold and hold down your left mouse button, and then you just sort of drag left and right. And what happens is you see your shell kind of undergo a transformation, is it's literally undergoing a process where Maya is applying a mathematical equation to your UV shell. And what it's trying to do is it's looking at what you have out here, it's looking at how you've laid out your UV shells, and it's trying to make each face in your shell be as close to the size and proportion of each face on your actual object. So it's a little bit of magic. And the Smooth tool is under Tools if you have the newer version of the UV editor. And again, you hover your cursor over the word unfold, left mouse button, and drag. And what I like about it is it's kind of taking you through its math process where it's figuring it out. And you can go all the way from where you're starting, right where you are, to the end. But you can also hit anywhere in between. So you kind of watch as it morphs into this new shape. And at any point you can go, oh, looks good, I like it, and just stop. And you don't have to continue any further. So you can take it all the way to the end, or you can, again, leave it as it was before you did the process, and it's entirely up to you. Now, again, if you look at this, it looks pretty good. These squares look decent. There's a little distortion. These look really good, but they're kind of smaller. Okay, so let's take a look. If I take it all the way to the right with the unfold tool, you'll notice, wow, nice smooth transition. All of my squares are the same size. Everything neatly connects to one another. The only downside is my squares and triangle, or my squares are all kind of like at an angle. There's a little bit of a strange angle to my pattern. And that's because if you look at this shape of my shell is kind of curved now. But truth be told, if I took this piece of plastic, which represents the cap part of this marker, the sort of the neck, it holds the felt. If I took a knife or something like that and cut this piece of plastic at one spot and then laid it out flat, it probably would look a lot like that. That is a more accurate layout. I'm looking at this thing, and that's what it would look like, in my opinion. So yes, my squares are kind of at an angle, but that's actually a really good layout. Now, could I, if I really wanted to keep those relatively straight, just go part way, right? Maybe I just go part way through this process. I don't go all the way because that's too far. Maybe I bring it back. I mean, I'm just holding down my left mouse button as I do it. Maybe right there. Okay, things are all still relatively straight. UVs are looking pretty good. Now there's a little bit of a wobble in here, but I can grab those UVs, right? Just grab those guys and using my scale tool, scale in the axis that they're on and flatten them back out. So I can kind of neaten that up, right? So now my squares are closer to the same size to each other. They're nice and straight. It's looking pretty good. That's not too bad. So this is actually another option for a layout. And it's not that one of them is right or wrong. It's just which one is better for what I need it to do. And you might be wondering, well, why would I want one over the other? Well, let's assume we're using an application to create a texture for this object, right? We want to write Markero, the coolest marker ever. So no, I don't want to check for updates. Thank you. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to make a new document here. All right. Now, if I'm going to make it a texture, Markero, the greatest marker ever. All right. If I'm creating text that I will be using in a texture, you'll notice that, you know, Word, just like Photoshop or anything else, it creates the text in a linear pattern, right? Everything is on a line. Everything is straight. So if I'm trying to apply this texture to a UV shell, if my shell is very straight, that's going to be easy to do, right? Because it's going to lay right on there straight. My UV shells are straight. Now, in the opposite of this case, if I'm using my Smooth UVs tool and I've got it curved like this, when I try to apply my text, let me squash this down a little bit. When I try to apply my text will go on this thing straight, but my surface is actually curved. So my text won't line up nice and straight. It will look weird on my marker. It will be curved on this surface rather than straight. And it's true, I could go into Photoshop and distort the text. I could, you know, put a lattice on it and try to bend it, but that's going to change the font. It's going to distort the shapes because it'll have to turn it into a graphic. So it's going to, yeah, you can try to use Photoshop Magic, but it's going to mess with the shape of the letters when you distort it, because it basically takes the text and it turns it into an image. And then you have to distort that. You have to stretch it and squash it to try to get it to fit on this curvature. So the question you have to ask yourself is, well, which UV layout do I need? Well, is there going to be text on this? Because if there is, you're probably better off with something a little bit less curved, something a little bit more like that. Or you might even go, you know what? I think it was fine before. This is good enough. My text will lay perfectly on my UVs. This is not the absolute greatest UV layout ever, but it's really good and it does what I need it to do, and it makes it easy for me to put text on my object because the text will lay out linearly. Does that make sense at all? That's kind of a second and third tier thinking in terms of texture application. But again, what do I need this to do is very important when you're laying out your shells. What is this thing going to do? What angle am I going to see it from? What kind of texture is going to go on this thing? I mean, if this piece right here is supposed to be all jet black, right? There's no text on there, no drawings, no pictures of ducks or whatever. Well, heck, then let's just make sure we got a great UV layout because that's what matters the most. So you kind of have to think which, what do I need? What do I need this thing to do? But you have to know what its ultimate goal is, what's its job, so that you can make great decisions or ask great questions, because you also might be like, you know what? If this thing is going to have no text on it, but are we going to be bringing this thing into ZBrush or something like that to add like a 3D component to it? In which case, yeah, we're not adding text, but we're going to bring some raised graphic on there or something. I better have a really good UV layout because that's going to give me a much better result bringing this into another application. So you really have to, again, be aware, what's the process? What is the pipeline that this object is going through? And what do I need this object to do? Because that helps you answer questions about how to do something, or ask great questions about what it is you have to do. And yeah, and David was saying, you could also make a single face separated with a UV shell and add an individual texture on that, which you could do, but then you would have a texture seam on that single face. So what you have to ask yourself is, if I separate that, is it going to leave a seam there that will be seen easily? So there's a lot of questions and a lot of options on that, and it really it's specific to this particular assignment, whatever it is you're doing. What is this marker doing? How is it being used? What kind of texture goes on it? Where's my camera going to be? All that stuff. Does that make sense? Okay, good. And again, it is kind of complicated when you have to think, several moves ahead into the future for what this thing is supposed to do. But that is part of the job. You have to do that. You have to imagine, what am I using this for? For example, if you said to me, hey, I need to buy a car, what kind should I get? Anybody who says, oh yeah, get a Jeep, or whatever they throw out, those people are not thinking ahead at all. What you have to do, if you ask me, hey, what car should I get? Then I would say to you, well, what do you need this car to do? Are you just going to and from work? Do you go off-roading on the weekends? Do you have a surfboard? Do you have dogs? There's a whole bunch of questions I would ask you long before I would give you an answer, because I need to know exactly what you need this car to do before I can give you advice as to which car I think you should look at. And then that's not even including, hey, let's look at, the average lifespan of this vehicle, average expenses, the history of bad components in any given vehicle, the research, is it a new model year and therefore likely to have more issues because they haven't worked out all the design problems yet? There's a whole bunch of stuff we will delve into, but it all starts with, what do I need this thing to do? And then, okay, now based on all of that information, now we're making smarter decisions. So with UVs, it's the same kind of thing. You just got to think, what's the end result? What is this thing going to do? How does it need to function? And you get that information from the storyboards you're given. Everybody gets storyboards, whatever project you're working on, and it shows you, okay, this is what's going to happen. The camera will be here. We cut to the camera there. Camera moves in like this. Okay, so I'm going to need to move that seam to the bottom. Okay, this is a still image. There's no text on the side. Oh, but there is this raised graphic component, which means it's going to go into ZBrush, because that's too fine a detail for me to do with modeling, and it doesn't even make sense. Therefore, a better UV layout is going to be more important than having a more crisp, squared off layout. Does that make sense? Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. Like I said, this is sort of second and third tier thinking, which, might not make any sense to you right now, and that's okay. But what I'm hoping is, the next time you start hearing these ideas, and the next time you start to play with these concepts, you start thinking, oh, you know what? I remember hearing about this. Steve was explaining something like this to me, and I think I've got it. I think I know what he's talking about. Because I think the first time you hear a concept, you're like, what the heck? That's like a whole other language. I don't even know what you're saying. But then the next time you hear it, oh yeah, no, I've heard those words before. So now what I can really do is focus on the concept. I don't have to struggle with the verbiage, because I get that. I've heard it before. So on occasion, I will throw out sort of more complicated stuff for beginners, just because it will help you so much the next time you encounter it, which will be, when you guys get to model creation, the next class. So if you get it now, great, that's awesome. You got a leg up. That's going to help you out tremendously. If you don't get it now, that's okay. That's all right. Really, for this class, what we are most concerned with, again, is nice, happy squares and good UV layout, the best that you can create. And we'll talk more about that. But are we good on this whole what do I need it to do idea? Just want to make sure you guys are getting what I'm putting out there. Okay, good. Just want to make sure. All right, so let's go take a look at some more fun stuff. All right. Now, once our UV shells are looking good, and excuse me, then we can move forward with the creation of a texture. And this is why we do the UV mapping, you know, because of the cool stuff we can do with textures, because of the cool stuff we can do with ZBrush and applications like that. There's so much neat stuff we can do, and that's why we put up with UV mapping, which is not my favorite thing to do. And that's, again, is that applying the textures. Because what happens is we bring all of our UV shells into the 0 to 1 space. You see, I got this picture of my 0 to 1 space, and all of the shells are inside that space, every little part of my body inside the 0 to 1 space. And then we can use this 0 to 1 space as like a template. It's kind of like paint by numbers, because I can paint these shells, and whatever we paint in the shell, it will show up on our models. Maya makes the transition from the shell and then puts it on the model. So you can colorize the shells, and then it puts those colors on the geometry. So it's just sort of, again, it's paint by numbers. And you can be like, oh, you know what? I'd really like the texture of a shirt on my guy. And I could just paint that in there. And then there it is. And then it appears right where I want it to. So literally, the 0 to 1 space is our guide for the texture process. Now, in terms of applying textures to your geometry, let's take a look at how that works. And to do that, we are going to open up our file that we were working on last class, which was the plane, the cube, and the cylinder. So we're going to break that thing out, and we're going to take it to the next level, application of textures. So we don't need this one anymore. I set my project back to my activity file folder, and I have saved my UV mapping activity that we did last class completed. So I'm going to open that up. And again, don't worry if the squares are different sizes on different objects. That's totally fine. The squares should be the same size on the same object. That's the most important thing. That means all the proportions are correct. So in terms of this process, the application of texture, what is super handy is we've actually done most of this stuff already several times. So this should be a bit of a rehash for you. Now, what I did was I actually created textures for you guys already. And this is typically not the way it's done. What we usually do is we create our UV layout, and then we go and paint textures right on those UV shells. But what we did was we created the textures in advance, just because we don't have enough time to paint the textures and then apply them. So we kind of cut a corner there, and we made the texture in advance for you. And what we did was we took the textures and we put them in the source images folder of your activity files. Because when you're trying to apply textures to geometry, that's the folder you put it in, source images. So everything is in here. It's the same folder that you put your image planes in when you're modeling. So what we did was we made a texture for the plane, a texture for the cylinder, and a texture for the cube. And we put them all inside the source images folder of the activity file folder. So make sure that when you guys are applying textures, that's where you put it as well, so Maya can find it, because that is the default folder that Maya goes to find texture information. So what you want to make sure of when you've got your copy of Maya open is that you've set your project to the activity file folder so that it can find the textures. So, excuse me, in terms of the texture application process, it's very similar to what we've already been doing. And yes, I've got a sore throat. My apologies, everybody. So in terms of applying the textures, when we put a checker pattern on our plane, that's the same thing. We applied a texture, but now we're going to put a different texture on there. So the process for applying a texture is going to be very similar to the processes we've done before. So step one, we create a new material. So we go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade, because that's where we create new materials. All right, so we're in our Hypershade, and we go to the Create section, and we go find and create a new Lambert, because that's what we work with. And after we create that Lambert, we then, of course, name it, and this is going to be my plane material, because this is the material I'm going to apply to the plane. Now before, when we applied the checker pattern, we went to the color channel and we went to the checker box in the end. Well, we're going to do that again. So we go to the color channel of the plane material, we go to the checker box and click on it, and it opens up our buddy, the Create Render node. If you recall, last time we were here, we used the checker node, right? That's how we created this. Well, this time we're going to use the File node, because this is how we attach images to various channels. So the File node, and this is supposed to be like two mountains with a sun or something. I don't know. It's supposed to be a landscape, but that's what that means, File. So what I'm going to do is click on File with my left mouse button, and that creates a File node. And you'll see under File Attributes, the sample is jet black because we did not tell it what picture to put in there yet. So it can't give you a sample. It doesn't know what it will look like. And again, under File Attributes, you'll see it says Image Name, and it's blank. Well, that's why this is jet black, because it doesn't know what to put in there. So we do notice that next to Image Name, there's a nice yellow folder, which we know is anytime you click on a yellow folder, you're saying, I'm going to navigate you to where this thing is. I'm going to steer you to it. So what we do is we click on this yellow folder with the left mouse button, and then we say, okay, Maya, which one of these images do you want to connect to this material? So you'll notice that if you look at the path, it's in my 3DF folder, it's in my activity file folder, it's in my source images folder. So Maya by default goes to the source images folder to find textures. That's why I set my project so it comes right in here and it says, well, which one do you want? I don't have to go hunt it down. It's not all over the place. It's in my source images folder. So I'm going to go to the plane texture, select an image. This is what it will look like, a cute little monkey. And then I say open. All right, so now I've got a sample. Now its name has been loaded. We're all good. If I go to the Hypershade window, Rendering Editors Hypershade, you will see I've got a material. Ah, there we go. There's my material with the picture on it. You're like, what the heck? That looks crazy. So what I need to do is take this material and apply it to my geometry, which is the last step, right? How do I apply material? That's an interactive question. I was not pausing for dramatic effect. Middle mouse button drag, absolutely. So middle mouse button gives me the green plus of power. I can drag and drop it, or I can select the geometry, right mouse button, assign material to selection. Any and all of those are fine, and it applies the texture on there. Now, in terms of its placement, if your UV shell is not in the 0 to 1, right? Here's my 0 to 1. We talked about that, right? You see my texture doesn't look good. It's not lined up properly, right? Because what happens is in the 0 to 1, we can place textures very precisely in a specific location. Out here, the texture just repeats again and again and again. So if I don't have this thing in the 0 to 1, I'm not getting my texture where I want it. But if I take my UV shell and it's inside my 0 to 1 space, my texture is going to line up very well. Does that make sense? Okay, and we're going to do this 2 more times, so you will get more opportunities to see it, Clavin, okay? But make sure you're jotting this stuff down. Luckily, it's just building off of what we've already been doing a little bit, so it's not too complicated. It's the same as when we applied the checker pattern. But much like Alden's UV editor yesterday, or Tuesday, or Saturday, Thursday, I'm not seeing my texture in here, which kind of bums me out a little bit. But I can make an adjustment there and make that fit. Now, what is super cool about texturing is if you looked at this, you would think, oh my goodness, that is a really great painting. Look at that modeling. Look at those details. This guy's a genius, this modeler. Look at that. Whoa. But there's nothing there. It's just a geometry plane. But with the use of a texture, all of a sudden that looks way more cool than it did before. And that's why texturing is so neat. And that's why we put up with UV mapping, because then we can make these great textures that create the illusion of much more complicated detail. Because I don't have the geometry to make all of these details, right? But if I paint with highlights and shadows, we see depth, and then that's why textures are so cool. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So here we go. We're looking at our cube now. All right, I'm going to apply a texture to here. So if you missed that process, how do I apply the texture? We're going to do it again. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my UV shells and I'm going to take them out of the 0 to 1 first. I'm going to put them out here, so you know that's going to yield a weird looking texture, but I will bring them back in. All right, so the process for applying a texture to geometry, these are the steps. Number 1, open up the Hypershade and create a new material. Window, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. So we go back to the Hypershade. Number 2, make a new material. So I go to the Create section, scroll to Lambert, make a new one, right? And of course we name stuff. So I'm going to close the Hypershade. This is going to be my cube material because I'm going to apply the material to my cube. Now, the next step for applying a texture is within the material, go to the color channel, go all the way to the right to the checker box, click on it, and it opens up the Create Render Node window. Once we are within the Create Render Node window, we go to the File node, because this is how we attach pictures, 2D textures and files. So we click on the File node, and it creates one of those. And again, the sample is completely dark, and there's no name here, because Maya does not know what texture to put on there. What picture do you want to apply? Well, let me tell you, Maya, by clicking this yellow folder. So I click the yellow folder, and I navigate to the image I want. And again, it's in the source images folder, so Maya knows where to look. It just needs to know which one. So I choose the cube texture. That's what it should look like. And I hit open. So now, in my Hypershade, you will see that I have, there's my cube material right there. Right? And so what I'm going to do is I need to apply this material to this object, because right now it's made of the checker material. So again, there's many ways to do this, but I can, with the middle mouse button held down, drag and drop, and that's going to apply the texture. So now this object is no longer made of the checker material. It's made of this new texture material that I created. However, you can see by looking at it, something looks wrong. And that's because my texture is not, or my UV shells are not lined up properly in my UV editor. So if I go back to my UV editor, I can see, this is going to be interesting. Actually, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to shut down Maya and start it again, just because I really want to be able to show you guys the texture in here. And if it's not doing that, it's harder for me to explain it to you. So I'm just going to let Maya take a little nap here. And I'm going to launch it up again and see if I can get that thing to show up within the UV editor. because it is really important that I can show that to you. It's much easier to explain. So we'll just see if after a very brief timeout, Maya is being a little bit more cooperative. I might need to restart my machine. I was up very late last night grading, and then up early again with email, and I did not let Maya sleep overnight. We've both been working hard. All right, set my project. I'm going to open my scene. Again, it's the activities being done already. Okay. So again, Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. I'm going to create a new material. It will be a Lambert number 6, which I will name my cube material. Bull. And then again, in Clavin, you get another demonstration, so you get 4 instead of 3. Go to the color channel, click on the checker box, choose the file node. Again, now that I'm in here, I go to the under file attributes, go to the image name, click on the yellow folder, and I'm going to choose my cube and apply it. So now I've got this material, and then all I have to do is assign it to this object, because again, right now it's made of this checker material. So I can middle mouse button, drag and drop it on there, and that should work. And let's take a look at the UV editor and see if it's giving me an image in there. That would make me really happy. Oh, terrific. All right. So just a quick little timeout was all Maya needed. But again, I want to pull these shells out of here so we can talk about some important stuff with shells. All right, now you can see obviously things are not lining up well here. This is not what's supposed to be going on. So I'm going to attach these shells, I'm going to move these shells so that they cover the correct aspect of the texture. And hopefully this will make the texture process a little bit more clear for you. So let's start with the front of the cage. So this box is going to be the front of the cage that this monkey is in. And if we zoom way in and you look at these images, obviously this is the front image of the monkey in the cage. And if I select this face, I see this is the shell that represents that face. So what I'm going to do is take that texture and I'm going to put it right over the monkey. And again, typically what we do is we lay out our UVs in the 0 to 1 first, and then we create the texture. This is kind of doing things a little bit backwards from the way they typically are. But you can see now it looks like a monkey in the cage. And you can see how powerful texturing is, because that looks like a 3D cage that there's a monkey in there. That's great, but it's just a cube. There's nothing going on. All right, so that's the front of the cage. Let's do the top of the cage. Here's the top of the cage. And if I look at my texture elements, this is the top of my monkey cage. And I've selected this face, so I know it's this one. So I'm going to drag that down and put that over the top of the monkey cage. And then now you see, oh yeah, that texture is on top now. Let's do, how about the back? All right, so I select the back face of my cube. This is the back of the monkey texture. And there's the face associated with the back. So I'm going to bring that one in. Put it on top. All right. And again, that's looking lined up pretty well. All right. So a couple more things we got to line up. Let's do this face here. And this is a side view of my monkey. And if you look, I can see these two side views here. So I'm going to move this in and line it up with the texture. And you can see the monkey is facing forward. So that makes sense. That's the correct side. Wallet thief. Okay. Here's the bottom of my monkey cage. And again, if I look at my texture options, this is most likely the bottom. So I'm going to take that shell and put it on top of there. All right, so my cage has a bottom. And now it's time for me to do this face right here. So this is the last face that I have available, so I'm going to bring it down and put it over this. All right, line these guys up. Now, when you look at this, you say, oh, wait a minute, that's not right. It's reading wrong. It says regnad, right? That can't be. And the monkey's facing the wrong way. This is the front, so he should be looking this direction. So what's wrong with this, do you think? What's the problem? It's reversed, absolutely. So here's what we have to do. We need to stay out of regnad. We need to reverse. We need to opposite what we're seeing. And the way we can see, because you might be wondering what's wrong with this thing. If you go to View and you choose Shaded with the new UV editor, Maya will shade the shells. Blue means the shell is facing the right way. Red means the shell is facing the wrong way. It's upside down, and that's why we're reading it as backwards. If you're in the old UV editor, I believe it's under Modify, Shade UVs, so that's how you can see the colors. So the problem is, if your shell is red, it's upside down. So what we want to do is grab the shells that are upside down. Here's one here. And I'm going to go to Modify and choose Flip. And it basically just flips it over and it makes it blue. Again, if you have the old version of the UV editor, it's under Polygons way over here. So again, it couldn't be simpler. You just kind of grab the UV shell and flip it. All right. Now, once everything is blue, and you'll see it says regnad now until I flip it. Now it says danger. Once it's all blue, you know you've got the right setup. Everything looks good. All right. Now, in terms of UV mapping and what we're looking for grading wise, this is most of what we're looking for. When you guys are UV mapping objects, and you're going to be, when you get to week 4, you're going to be UV mapping objects that you made. What you're going to do is, number one, because you don't have to apply a texture. The stuff that you're doing for us, you don't have to make a texture. But number one, happy squares. So when I look at the object, I want to see happy squares all over it. And the squares should be the same size on the same object. So that's one criteria. Number two, you want to make sure that all of your squares or all of your shells are facing the correct direction, blue. So make sure you activate the ability to tell whether your shells are upside down or not, because that's another thing we're looking for. Okay, so happy squares, everything blue, all of your shells should be inside the 0 to 1. Also, that's another criteria that we're grading on. If you have a UV shell that is sticking partway out of the 0 to 1, you're not completely into the 0 to 1. Some of your textures are not going to line up properly. You must have all of your shells for this class inside the 0 to 1 space. So you got to make sure you're doing that. Another thing we're looking for, you'll notice all of our UV shells are separate. This is called collage UV layout, right? If you have shells on top of each other, that's not collage layout. So for this class, all of your UV shells have to be separate like this. All right? And you turn off the shading the same way as you turn it on. Does that make sense? So we're not asking for a lot of things, but you've got to do the few things I ask for. It's kind of like the idea that if I only ask you to do 4 things and you only do 3 of them, you just got a 75. Does that make sense? If I ask you for 4 things and you do 2 of them, you got a 50. So make sure you do all the things we ask for, and you'll do great. So again, happy squares, same size squares. Make sure everything fits into the 0 to 1. Make sure everything's blue, and make sure we don't have shells on top of each other. Everybody gets their own space. If you do those things, you're going to do great. Does that make sense in terms of what we're looking for? Good UV layout? Okay, yeah, shading on the older version is under modify. There should be shade UVs, I believe. They move stuff around sometimes, but I think it's under modify. Make sense? Hell yeah. You don't have modify. Is it under tools? Well, oh, no, I'm sorry. It's under image. Image shade UVs. That's what it's under. Image shade UVs. Yep, you're welcome. Sorry, they keep changing versions on me. They move stuff around. It makes my job just short of a living hell. Because I'm working with beginners and they keep moving stuff around. So I apologize. That's not easy. But I do my best to keep all the versions straight. All right, so let's do the last one so that we can see this in action. And since we've already got the shade UVs on, if you've got the new version, it's under view. If you have the old version, it's under image. Do the shells have to be arranged in a certain order? As long as you're in there 0 to 1, it's fine. It doesn't really make a difference in terms of the layout. It just has to, everything has to be in the 0 to 1 if you want to align textures in specific locations, the color information. All right, so let's do this last one. And I'm going to grab these shells. And again, I'm going to take them out of the 0 to 1 until we get the texture in there. And you can already see what's wrong with this guy. It needs to be flipped. Yes, you're correct. So I grab that shell and I go to modify flip. So now everything's blue. And again, we go through the process. Windows, rendering editors, hypershade. So I create the new material. I go to the hypershade, I go to the create section, I click on Lambert. Again, luckily this process is repetitive, so hooray for that. We do the same thing again and again. So I create my new Lambert. Of course, I have to name it, and this is going to be my cylinder material. And then, of course, I'm going to go to the color channel and click on the checker box at the end. And that opens up the create render node. Again, remember this is where we went to get the checker, but this time we want the file node. So we click on file. There we go. It creates the place 2D texture so that you can attach an image to a material. Under the file attributes, you'll see image name. So I go all the way to the right to the yellow folder and I click on it. And then I find my cylinder texture and attach it. So I get a little sample up there. Its name appears. I know we're good on that front. So now all I have to do is apply my cylinder material to my cylinder. So there's my cylinder, and I apply the material. Many ways to do it, but drag and drop is a pretty easy one, right? And if I look at my texture, okay, I can see where it goes now. Again, we typically do the texture second, not first. We usually create UV layout and then make a texture and then we apply stuff. So again, we had to make the texture in advance just because we don't have enough time to do it, create a texture and apply it. I wish we did though. So again, these are the ends of my soup can. So here's one end here. Let me grab that one. And that's not it. Must be this one. There we go. So this will be the top of my can. I drag my cylinder, or the top of my cylinder on there, line it up so that it looks pretty good. All right. Grab this guy and do the same. This is the bottom of my can. So I line that one up. All right, so those guys are looking pretty good. There's the bottom of my can. There's the top of my can. So the last thing I have to do is the middle of my can. And here's the label. So what I'm going to do is take this and bring it down here. And you can see, oh, that's not going to work. What do I need to do? Rotate it, absolutely. Using my rotate tool, I'm going to flip it around and use my move tool to line it up. All right. Now, looking at my can, is that right? No. What's wrong with it? Upside down, that's right. And it doesn't quite fit, but that might help. We'll see in a second. But it's definitely upside down because this is the top of my can and that's the bottom of my label. So what I need to do is flip that bad boy over completely so that the label is facing the right direction relative to the lid on my can. I'm lining up my texture. All right. Unicorn meat. There's the lid. Now, something I want to draw your attention to, because this happens. What's going on right here? What's that? Do you guys know? He has a mismatch. What's causing that? Why is there a mismatch there? That doesn't look right. Texture seam, Brian, you are correct. And yes, it was painted that way. But the issue we're having here is we have a texture seam because that's where the edge of the UV shell meets, right? Here's the edge right here. And if I grab it, you can see, oh yeah, this is the edge of my texture and there it is. But look at, watch this. I'm going to grab the UVs right here. Is that the one I want? I want the one on this side. This guy. So I'm going to grab my UV right here and watch. I'm going to move it a little bit. And I'm going to grab this guy and move him just a little bit too, because it's, see that hard angle there? So move that one a little bit. Right? And then I'm going to come over here to this end, grab this UV, this guy, because you can see this is still just a tiny bit high. Grab this one and just bring it down a little bit. Doesn't that look better? So it's all about making these little tweaks. So even after you've applied your texture, you know, you're not out of the woods yet. You still got to make it look good. So if you need to do some tweaking, if you need to grab some individual UVs and make some adjustments, you can do that. Little tiny fixes. It doesn't seem like much, but it really makes a big difference in terms of your UV layout. So you can improve how that texture falls on that object just by tweaking it a little bit, even after the fact, to make it look better. Does that make sense? So we hid that label, we hid that seam as best we could. It still didn't look so great, but we still have the opportunity to tweak just a little bit, play with those UVs and move that texture just a little bit. Does that make sense? Yay, good. I'm glad. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I'm so happy. All right. So let's talk about texture application. Now, the cool thing is, once we have laid out our UVs and they're in the 0 to 1 and they're lined up nicely and everything looks beautiful, then we can go ahead and apply textures to things and make them look great. Again, we made these textures in advance and matched the shell to the texture, when in actuality it's the other way around. We lay out the UVs and then we paint the texture to match the UVs. Still though, sometimes you have to move the UVs, kind of tweak them a little bit to make them look better. In the end, it's all about making it look good. So, don't be afraid of having to tinker with it, that's fine. But again, the typical process is once you get your UVs in there and looking great and everything is looking, totally awesome, that's when we go into the creation of the texture process. And in this instance, we're actually going to get a chance to see that by creating an AO, or ambient occlusion pass. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with AO pass or ambient occlusion and what that means, if you look at this object and you look really closely, you'll see there's some like shading inside the creases and the crevices of this object. And it looks a little bit dirty. There's like a little bit of a layer of grime on it or something. And it's interesting because the AO pass or ambient occlusion pass is often referred to as the dirt pass or the speck pass. Because what it does is it kind of grunges things up a little bit and it makes your models look awesome because it really accentuates detail. It creates like shadowy areas, which will make the details pop out more. So it's a really cool process for creating a neat texture. And honestly, if you're going to be a modeler for a career, even if you don't paint textures for your models, which to be honest with you, if you are a modeler, you are like 95% or higher likely to be also the texture artist. But if you are a modeler, you will be laying out your UVs. That's a given. But even if you don't texture your models, at the very least, create an ambient occlusion texture for it, because it makes your models look so much cooler when you put that on there. But let's take a look at that AO pass. How do we create it and what does it look like? All right, so first things first, what the heck is an AO pass? So if you make a fist right now and you look at the wrinkles in your fist, right, and you see that there's sort of some shadowing that takes place there, sort of self-shadowing. And what's happening is light can't get in there. Those things are too close together and they sort of shadow each other. They cast a shadow on each other because light can't get in there. And so when we create an ambient occlusion pass, we're basically setting up Maya to create these darkened areas in our models, and that's what accentuates detail and shape change. And that's why that's an interesting looking image. So what we're going to do is the same kind of thing, because this happens in the real world. This is part of our world in terms of lighting. So we're going to try to recreate this and use that to augment the quality of our models. So what we're going to do is create a dirt pass or a speck pass for our geometry. And like I said, it's really neat in terms of what it does to the detail of your models and makes them look so much cooler. And we're always trying to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an ambient occlusion pass for our jar. Now, the good news is the ambient occlusion pass is not a complicated process, but again, it's one of those things where there are several steps, and if you are missing one of them, you are out of luck. So you got to make sure that you have all of the steps, and that will ensure a successful creation of an ambient occlusion pass. All right, now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a file. Hopefully I've got a file of a jar that I've already UV mapped. Let me see if I can find one in here. I think maybe in my skill check files, do I have one? I think I've got one that I've already mapped. Oh yeah, jar UV'd. All right, I'm gonna open that one. All right, so here's my jar. It's already been UV mapped, and this is what you guys had to do for the last lecture, was UV map this jar. And I do want to make sure to set my project to my skill check file folder, because that's where that jar is. And when I create that ambient occlusion texture, that's where it's going to send it. So if I don't set my project first, it's going to send it somewhere else. And it's super frustrating when you're trying to figure out what's going on. All right, so first things first, let's take a look at my UV layout. We're going to go to UV and check out the editor. And when I look at my UV layout, I can see, and this is a good hint of how to do your previous skill check, UV mapping your jar. You can see here's the outside bottom of my jar. Here's the inside bottom of my jar, because you can see there's an inside and an outside, and you got to have them both in there, right? There is an inside and an outside. There's two different layers in there because the jar has thickness to it, right? And you'll notice I've got one seam down the side, right, all the way down, and you'll notice that it looks like one piece here, and that's because the outside of my jar and the inside of my jar, I sewed them together using Move and Sew. So I did a cylindrical map of the outside of my jar, I did a cylindrical map of the inside of my jar, I made sure they were both facing blue, and then I Move and Sew them together. Does that make sense in terms of my layout? Okay, so make sure that's what yours looks like, or something very similar. You will also notice, do I have any UV shells outside of my 0 to 1? Nope, I do not. Everything, all of my shells are inside of this 0 to 1. There's nothing hanging off a little bit. There's nothing, partway out. I don't have a piece over here. Everything is in the 0 to 1. Everything is blue. I got happy squares all over the place, all good. And you'll notice that I don't have my shells on top of each other, right? I don't want them crisscrossing each other. I don't need those things to be, oops, I'm a little bit on top there. Oh, darn, what's that? Because in order to create this ambient occlusion pass, if these shells are on top of each other, that will totally ruin it. If you have something out of the 0 to 1, that will totally ruin it. If you have bad layout, that will totally ruin it. So there are many ways for this to go amok. And coincidentally, the things that we're grading on are the things that will yield a good AO pass. So if you do the things we asked for, you do the things we showed you, this will work. But they all hinge on each other. It's like dominoes. If one of them is out of alignment, it doesn't work. All right, so in terms of the creation of the AO pass, it's not that complicated, but again, there are several steps. So you got to make sure you do them all properly. Now, the first step to the creation of the AO pass is we are going to create a new material. And basically this new material, up to now we've been working with Lambert. That's been our buddy. Everything is Lambert. Well, this new material is a special material because its whole job in life is to record light information. So what happens is this new material, basically you say, oh, this jar is made of this new special material. And what it does is it asks itself, where is light shining on this object? And how does that create shadow? And then what it does is it remembers where the shadow was. So for example, if there's some shadowing in here, it's going to remember, oh yeah, I got to put some shadowing right here. And it basically bakes the shadow information right onto a texture. So it creates an image and it uses your UV layout as a guide, and it creates shadow, and it remembers where the shadow was, so that you can basically apply shadows to your objects all the time. So whether there's light there or not, the shadow is present. So what we have to do is create this special material and apply it to this object. Again, luckily this is something we've been doing again and again, so we're very familiar. The only difference is this special material is only available when we use the rendering engine and the rendering engine is the part of works in conjunction with Maya to create the final image. Think of it like a camera or a canvas that you're going to paint on. When you're going to create a painting, or you're going to create a drawing, or you're going to take a picture, this rendering engine is what actually makes that. So what we have to do is activate this rendering engine. Now, if you go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, this is where this special rendering engine is, because by default it's turned off. And that's because Maya does not make this rendering engine, somebody else does, but they made it to work with Maya. They work together. So we have to actually turn it on. And because if you go to Window Rendering Editors Hypershade, you'll notice, here's all the materials we typically use, all this fun stuff, but we need to activate this special materials, which are part of this process or the rendering engine called Arnold. And I don't know why they chose Arnold as a name, but that's what they chose. So we go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. So make sure you go to the Plugin Manager. And this is where all of Maya's third-party plugins are, the stuff that's not turned on necessarily. And you'll see quite a few of them are off. And what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down, down, and you'll see there's something called the MTOA bundle. And that is the Maya to Arnold bundle. Maya to Arnold bundle. So make sure you click on Loaded and then hit refresh, and it will load it for you. All right, so make sure you hit that refresh. Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. So you just got to refresh it. And then what will happen is once you do that, you'll notice you have a new main menu item called Arnold. And that wasn't there previously. So you can activate it. So now it's ready to go. Arnold, Arnold, Arnold. So that you can do that special thing. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is create that material and assign it to this object, right? So Windows, Rendering Editors Hypershade, because anytime we're talking materials, we're talking Hypershade. So here we are in the Hypershade, and you'll see under Arnold that, because this isn't here until you turn Arnold on, but now once you turn that on, we've got all these fun things to play with. And these are different materials and such that you can work with using Arnold as your rendering engine. So if you go to under Arnold, go to Shader, and you'll see right up here at the top there's a special material, AI Ambient Occlusion. And this is that really cool material that I was talking about, that's whole job is to capture light and shadow information. That's all it does. So what we want to do is, again, under Arnold and Shader, click the Ambient Occlusion material, and it creates this node that looks kind of like a white circle. And we're not creating Arnold, we're activating it. Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and then check on the MTOA bundle. So just make sure you've got that. All right. Now, once we've got this ambient occlusion material created, we middle mouse button, drag and drop, put it on the object. So now it's made of that. Because again, this special material, its whole job in life is to record light and shadow information. So make sure you this jar is now made of this special material. All right. Now, and when you select the jar, you should see that that's what it's made of now, this ambient occlusion material. So that's the shape node, and then you'll see it's made of this AI. Now, in terms of the way that this process works, these are the steps for the creation of the AO pass. First, we activate Arnold. Of course, we've got to turn that on because it's not on by default. Second, we have to create this AI material, and that's going to allow us to create the ambient occlusion. And then we apply it to our geometry. Third, we select our geometry in object mode. And then fourth, we go to Arnold. Here, let me move this over so it's not in the way. On our main menu, Arnold, Utilities. Oh, let me move this out of the way. Arnold, Utilities, and you'll see Render Selection to Texture. And that's what we want it to do, is render our selection to a texture. It's literally going to create a picture for us of where the highlights and the shadows go on this object. And one very, very important thing for you to remember is this jar is made of one piece of geometry. It's a jar, it's ceramic, so it's made of one piece. If I'm creating an AO pass for an object that is made of many pieces, what you need to do is select all the pieces and go to Mesh Combine first, and then create the texture. It's just easier that way. If you don't combine it first, it will create a separate texture for each piece, which is not a huge deal. You just have to reassign it by material to each separate piece. So it complicates it a little bit. But if you combine it first, it will make one texture, and then it's just easier for you that way. But luckily, this jar is made of just one material, so super easy. So we go to Arnold, we go to Utilities, and we go Render Selection to Texture. Now, we do have to tell it what to call it and where we want it to go. So I'm going to click on that little dot, 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 and you can see it's going to my skill check files. I'm going to send it to my source images folder because that's where I'd like it to go. All right. And let me move this over. So it's going to go to my source images folder for my skill check files, right? And in terms of the resolution and all this stuff, you don't really need to adjust this any. I would leave it at its resolution of 512, and the sort of quality control, camera samples or anti-aliasing at 3 is totally fine. If you wanted to make your shadows a little bit less rough, a little bit smoother, a higher number here would do that. Resolution would also do that. But what you have to be aware of is that it will take longer to do this process if you increase these numbers. So better bet is just leave those like they are. And then you just hit render for your final step. So you click that, and then right now you can see, oh, it's done already. And it created an image called jar shape EXR. That's the file type, EXR. And it's in my source images folder. Again, because I set my project and I told it where to put it. So if I go to my into my skill check folder and I look in my source images folder, here's my jar shape EXR file, the one I just created. And if you look at it, I haven't even opened it yet, but if you look at it, you can see, oh, okay. What do you guys think that is, that dark circle? What could that be? Right, the bottom of my jar, right? Because it's dark down in the jar, so it's very dark, right? And if you look at my my texture that it created for my jar, do you see how it's very dark down here? And it slowly gets lighter as it comes this way, almost like a gradient. That's because this is the bottom of the inside of my jar, and this is the top of the inside of my jar, and it's slowly getting lighter as you get towards the surface because light can actually affect it. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, here's the outside of my jar. And look, what do you think this part is right here? What do you think that is? Yep, that's that little band, right? So I got a little bit of shadow information. So here's what I need to do. I need to take this really cool image and I need to apply it to my geometry. And again, hooray, we've done this like 50 times, so we're really good at it now. The steps for applying a texture are, and you say it along with me, I should probably have a song. Windows, rendering editors, Hypershade. We got to create that new material. So again, I don't need this material anymore. This material's job in life is just to help me create that texture that I just made. So after that, I don't need it anymore. So what I'm going to do is go back to my buddy Lambert, because we love those. I'm going to make a brand new Lambert. And my Lambert, I'm going to name it because we always name stuff. And I'm going to call this my jar material. Okay. And my jar material, I want to attach that image that I created, right? Because it's super cool. And I want that to appear on my geometry. So my jar material, I'm going to go to the color channel, go all the way to the checker box, right? And again, this should seem like just a rehash for you guys. It opens up the create render node. And then which node do I want when I'm trying to attach a picture? Do you guys remember? File, absolutely. So I just go to File, click on it, and it says, okay, what do you want this thing to be? What picture do you want in there? So I have to, of course, tell it. I go to the File Attributes, Image Name, and I go to the yellow folder, click on it with the left mouse button. It says, which of these do you want? And again, because I set my project, it went right to my source images folder and says, well, which one do you want? You know, I don't have to go hunt it down. It's super easy. I want that one, please. Here's what it looks like. I can see the gradation there. There's the inside of my jar. There's the outside of my jar. There's that fun rim or lip detail. So I allow that to be connected. All right. Now, here's something that does happen, and I'm actually glad it did, because every once in a while it happens and it freaks people out a little bit. If you look at my jar material, you can see it looks like something crazy has happened. First off, I've got a checker pattern in the background, which we haven't had before, and my jar looks like some of it's missing. And if you look at the sample in the material viewer right here, it looks like some of it was like dipped in acid or something. It seems to have disappeared or burned away. And what we're running into is when I connected this thing, something else got connected to it as well. So what I'm going to do is select the material, and you'll see here's my jar material. There's the color channel, and that's telling me that there's a connection, right? And that's where I connected the file node, the image that I wanted to go in there, right? But under transparency, there's another connection. And I'm like, well, why? Well, I don't understand. I didn't connect anything to there. Well, Maya made a connection for me that I actually didn't want one there. It added an element of transparency. Okay, but I don't want transparency. I just want the color. So this is very important with my material. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it to the object first so you can see what it looks like all wonky, and then we're going to fix it. So again, middle mouse button, drag and drop. Now this object is made of the material, but I can't see the material. Why can't I see the effect of the material being on there? You guys remember? There's a little trick. Yes, Dennis is on it. 6 key, right? 6 is show texture. So what I have to do is make sure I press 6 on my geometry, and then I can see the texture. All right, so what the heck is going on here? It looks like I can sort of see through my jar. Well, remember, that's that transparency connection we were talking about. That should not be on there, and that's why it's doing that. So what I'm going to do is hover my cursor over the word transparency in the attribute editor, And again, the attribute editor is this icon here. It looks like 3 screwdrivers on top of each other. Go to the transparency channel, right mouse button, and choose break connection. And that will literally disconnect the transparency component. And once that disappears, okay, now my jar looks normal again. And I can see, oh, look at that cool shading in there. There's like a little bit of dirt or grunge. That looks neat, right? Super cool. Oh, what's that, do you think? Texture seam. Yes, good job, guys. Texture seam. So again, this is where the UVs were laid out, and that's where they went flat. So watch how I'm going to fix it. Again, just like I did before, I'm going to go to my UV editor, and I can see my layout. There are my UV shells. And I'll do the outside first because that's what we're looking at right here. Right, and let me, I'm going to turn off my texture borders so you can actually see the seam. And that represents this edge right here. See, if I grab this edge, I can see, oh yeah, that's this and this. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to move it. Right. So I'm going to grab the UVs on the edge of this object, right? And I'm just going to, let me see, what do I have? I grab some UVs over here and some UVs over here. I just want to make sure, there we go. See, my tool is right between them. So I had something else selected, and that's why my selection, my tool was appearing over here a little bit. So now that I've gotten that whole edge there selected, I'm just going to tuck it in a little bit. Because if you get super close, you can see where it was before. Do you see how it's kind of in that area that's a little bit gray? Well, that's why I see a little bit gray there. So what I'm going to do is tuck it in just a little bit. Just move it in to where it's back over just the white part. All right, I'm going to do the same thing up here. Grab those UVs, and I'm going to tuck them in so that they're over the white part. Now, if you look at this, you'll say, okay, that's better, but I still see a seam. That's because I have to do the other side too, because there's a seam over here as well. So again, I'm going to grab these UVs and tuck them in a little bit so that they're over just the white part. And you have to be super careful with this. You can't be too aggressive with it. Just tuck it in. Grab these guys and tuck them in. And I'm going to do the same thing on the interior, right? These guys here and those guys there. But watch what I did with my jar. That texture seam is all gone. Well, a little bit. There's a tiny bit of one. I got to tuck that in some more. But do you see how I'm able to get rid of that seam? Okay, good. So it's just a function of tucking it in a little bit. It's not that crazy a concept. But I think sometimes you're like, well, why is that even happening? That's crazy. But, you know, like I said, they're machines, they're not perfect. And thank goodness for that, because that means we all have jobs. Yay. So get rid of the seam on the inside. Looking good in the hood. Seam in the outside. A little bit of one there. And I'm going to tuck that in just a little bit more and see if I can eliminate that. And usually that'll do it. There we go. So now I have this really nice texture, and you can see, can you guys see that shading in there? That really cool, makes it look a little bit dirty, a little bit of grunge on that surface. It's pretty cool. And your models look just so awesome when you put that on there. Oh, a little bit of a texture seam down there. I got to fix that as well. So again, not a difficult thing to do, but you just got to know what you're looking at and what you need to do to fix it. So what I'm going to do is just grab this whole shell right here, and I'm just going to bring it in a little bit by scaling it ever so slightly. I don't want to scale it too much because I'll ruin the proportions. I don't want to mess those up. But I do want to eliminate that seam. So I got a little bit of one going there, and I'm going to assume, yep, the edge of my shell down here is in the sort of gray area. So I'm just going to grab these UVs on the bottom and then just move them up a little bit, back into the white area. And then everything looks fabulous. All right, get rid of those seams, make it look pretty. Okie dokie. Any questions about the AO pass? Okay, that's good, because guess what you're doing for your skill check? You're creating an AO pass. So you guys have this really cool pepper mill that we made for you, and the UVs are already laid out, so you don't have to do anything but create the AO pass. That's it. So the UVs are laid out, they're good, nothing's on top of each other, everything's in the 0 to 1, everything's blue. You guys have nothing to worry about except creating the AO pass. So you have to activate Arnold, and then you have to assign the material to the object, and then create that texture. Alrighty. And again, and that will be your skill check for lecture 9. So just make sure you activate Arnold. Again, window, settings and preferences, plugin manager. And then you want to make sure that in the plugin manager, you go down to the part that says MTOA bundle and just hit loaded and refresh, and that will turn it on. And then you have access to all of those cool Arnold things. Alrighty? All right, terrific. Alrighty, guys, so good luck, have fun, model like the wind. The week 3 turn-in is rough, so make sure you do that. What file in the skill check? Oh, you know, I think it's the, because we made it for you already, it's the jar acid, UV mapping, start, hierarchy. Huh. Where is that pepper mill? Oh, where is that pepper mill? Oh, you know what? I think it's on the activity itself. I think it is on, hang on one second. I believe it is in lecture 9. It's attached to the activity. Hang on. Lecture, oh, well, something's happening. What are you doing? Okay, here we go. Lecture 9 skill check right here. If we preview it, I'm pretty sure what it's going to tell me is that's where the pepper mill is for you to get to. And there's a little video that walks you through how to do the AO pass. So if you feel like, oh shoot, I think I missed something, watch that, please. And here's the file so that you can, this is where the pepper mill is. And again, a little video for you to watch if you feel like you missed something and you need a refresher. So make sure you watch that stuff. It is there for you. You have to actually look for it. My apologies. It doesn't magically appear, but it is in there. So just make sure you go to the skill check and you can bang that bad boy out. All right? All good? Terrific. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much. It was a good session today. I hope you learned a lot and you're really excited about why we do this UV mapping, because again, it's not super fun, but there's a really good reason we do it, and that is to create cool textures. So have fun with that stuff. If you're having trouble, remember, go to the Google Hangout, get some help and some feedback, because that's what we have these live people in there for, is to help out with that kind of thing. So And yes, you can hand draw your own textures and apply them to objects. In fact, I remember one particular project I was working on when I was in school. I literally painted my own textures, and it turned out really cool. And I'm not just tooting my own horn. It was really neat because I painted it with watercolors, and watercolors have a very distinct look to it in terms of their appearance, and that was really fun. I really enjoyed that process, and of course there wasn't anybody to show me how to do it. I had to figure it out, but that's why I encourage you to explore and figure things out, because you learn so much from the things that you figure out on your own, much more than I could show you. So find ways to explore when you have some free time after you've done your assignments, and then you can learn all kinds of stuff. Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing you all again on Tuesday. We're winding down. We're almost out of classes, which is sad, but all things come to an end, both good and bad. So we will talk then. All right. So until then, model, model, model. You have lots to do. And I look forward to seeing what you guys do for week 3. Hoping there'll be a couple of Lego people out there. I'd love to see those. So good luck, everybody. And I will see you on Tuesday.